It's 1960, and in a world where its competitors were cutting corners, Boeing planes were made with craftsmanship. Boeing's leaders put engineering first, not profits. Working at Boeing felt like you were making history, making flying machines as so much of the public was using for the first time in their lives. And their philosophy was, build it safe, build it strong, no matter the cost. And thanks to this philosophy, they launched hit after hit. Planes that were considered indestructible, including the legendary Boeing 737 in 1967. Yeah, 1967, and we still use it today. But today these Boeing 737 Maxes are falling out of the sky, doors are flying off, and planes are shipped out with missing bolts. So what happened? Well, over in Europe, they were building their own aircraft manufacturing company to beat the American giants. They pooled French, German, British, and Spanish resources together to create one massive pan-European corporation called Airbus. And Airbus was starting to be a threat, so the American government decided that it wasn't a good idea to have multiple smaller American companies trying to fight Airbus, and it'd be better to combine the whole nation's might into one company to beat Airbus. So Boeing was basically forced into merging with its failing competitor McDonnell Douglas in the late 90s. But this completely backfired for big reason. See, if you're going to create this national champion, then you're basically creating a monopoly in your country, so you need strong government regulation to make sure this national champion doesn't do monopoly things. And European regulation has been much stronger at keeping Airbus's behavior in check. But the American system is notorious for letting corporations lobby the government to deregulate themselves. Well, you know who loved lobbying the government? The new guys from McDonnell Douglas. And they were now deep inside of Boeing. These were executives who weren't about passionate engineering first, but about shareholder returns first. They cut corners, and the passenger planes they designed themselves had cargo doors that blew off and floors that collapsed, which took the lives of 1,200 people in a single decade. But that was okay for them because they didn't build their business off of safe passenger planes. They built it by working the inside game of Washington and winning lucrative government defense contracts funded by taxpayers. But not only were these guys deep in Boeing, they rose to the top of Boeing to control it. They rose because Wall Street shareholders loved these guys. In Wall Street's eyes, Boeing engineers had already built great products that could last decades, so it was finally time to milk it dry. So the company's board put the new McDonnell Douglas execs in charge. And even at the lower levels, McDonnell Douglas managers were known to be aggressive and skilled at climbing the corporate ladder, while Boeing managers tended to be a bit more quiet and engineering-focused, meaning that Boeing's old managers would get taken over. All of this led to a running joke that even though technically Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, it was really more like McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing with Boeing's money. So what did this new Boeing leadership do? Well, they started by building a lobbyist army to buy politicians. These lobbyists knew that being a monopoly gave them massive leverage over Congress, so they would go up to Congress members from states where Boeing had factories employing tens of thousands of Americans and basically tell them, hey buddy, we're going to close our factories in your state, move them over to another state, and your state is going to lose tens of thousands of jobs, meaning we're going to make you lose re-election unless you cut taxes and loosen regulation on us. Then, once Boeing controlled Congress members from both sides, Boeing directed them to attack the regulators. These Congress members argued that regulators were slow, regulators were costing American jobs, and besides, we don't want Airbus to win, do we? No? Well then stop holding Boeing back with all this regulation. And to top off the assault on government institutions, Boeing would start offering the regulators jobs at Boeing. These were nice, cushy jobs that paid double what the regulators were making. And a lot of the regulators selfishly wanted to work at Boeing more than they wanted to work for the government. So the regulators themselves would compete amongst each other to win brownie points with Boeing so that maybe they could get hired. The regulators were now trying to please Boeing instead of Boeing trying to please the regulators. Combine this all together, and by the early 2000s these McDonnell Douglas type of execs now controlled Boeing, Congress, and regulators. And their monopoly was backed by the US government, and they inherited the old Boeing's wholesome reputation. The stage was set for them to milk the company with nothing to stop them, and they were willing to cut costs to a dangerous level so that executives and shareholders could pocket that money instead. Well, this mentality would create a crisis in 2010. See, in 2010, a new jet engine hit the market. This engine was big and it was fuel efficient, but one problem, Boeing couldn't fit this new jet engine on its 737 planes. So you remember how the Boeing 737 was made in the 60s? Well, back in the 60s, passengers boarded the plane using these ladders. So Boeing designed the planes to be low to the ground to give the passengers an easy boarding experience. But that meant the plane was too low for this new giant jet engine to fit on the plane. Airbus planes, however, weren't designed in the 60s. They were designed in the 80s where passengers boarded using these airport walkways that we're familiar with today. So Airbus planes were much taller, and Airbus could easily fit the new giant jet engines onto their planes. This gave Airbus a massive competitive advantage. Airbus planes were now way more fuel efficient, and fuel is a major cost for airlines, so airlines rushed to buy these new Airbus planes. Boeing executives panicked at what to do, so Boeing engineers proposed designing a new plane, a high-quality plane that could optimally fit large jet engines. I mean, these 737s were designed in the 60s, so it's about time we launch a new innovation, right? But creating a brand new design would take years. This was years where Airbus could capture market share. So Boeing management demanded its engineers to come up with a faster solution, which ended up being this. Instead of centering the engine right underneath the wings like this, in the classic model, just put the new giant engine more forward on the wing like this where there's more space. This was kind of a janky fix. It would sometimes push the plane's nose upwards when you fly it. So to patch that up, Boeing made a computer program that silently forced the plane's nose back down to correct it. Now the thing is, if you're going to make all these changes to a plane, then regulators have to approve every step of it, and pilots have to be trained on how to deal with these changes, but all of that takes time, and time is money. So Boeing basically just covered up this fix and made it look like no big deal. They lied to regulators, told them nothing. Thing really happened, no need for lengthy reviews. And crucially, they just didn't bother telling pilots to avoid having to train them. They just rebranded this janky new plane as the Boeing 737 MAX and started selling it. Well, in one fateful day in 2018, a Boeing 737 MAX flight takes off from Indonesia, and the sensor on the plane starts going off, alarm blaring, to alert the computer program to push the nose down. But the sensor is broken, it shouldn't be going off. The computer program is just forcing the plane towards the ground. The pilots try to steer the plane back upwards, but Boeing made the computer program override any pilot controls because this computer program was supposed to just silently operate.
The pilots have no idea what is happening. Pages rustling, frantic muttering.
So the plane crashes straight into the sea, taking the lives of everyone on board. Months later in Ethiopia, the same thing happens again, taking the lives of everyone on board. By this point, it's clear that the problem is with the 737 MAX, so regulators around the world demand that every 737 MAX plane is grounded until an investigation is launched. American regulators actually resisted doing so at first since they were basically Boeing puppets at that point, but the international pressure finally forced them to give in and launch an investigation. Well, the investigation reveals this hidden computer program, and the world is furious. If Boeing had just given the pilots a way to disable the computer program and train them on the new plane for a few months, then the pilots could have stopped these tragedies, but Boeing didn't. Boeing's corporate greed took the lives of 346 innocent passengers. Leaked internal messages showed engineers saying, "Would you put your family on a MAX simulator aircraft? I wouldn't." One engineer's message said, "I still haven't been forgiven by God for the covering up I did last year." Engineers break down in tears while testifying to Congress, saying they went along with this because they felt overruled by their managers, who pressured them to rush out their product and ignore safety concerns. And you want to know how the regulators decided to fix this issue? They just required that Boeing puts 2 sensors on its plane, not 1, because what are the odds that both sensors fail, right? This was the cheapest possible fix to this problem. So we're still flying in these janky Boeing 737 MAXs today, they just have 2 sensors on them, and the pilots are trained on how to disable the computer program. The Justice Department also fines Boeing $2.5 billion, but Boeing had taken $40 billion in stock buybacks alone in the 5 years prior, so they still profited massively from their reckless decision-making. The Boeing CEO gets fired, but the CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, would still walk away with a $62 million bonus package. And to this day, not a single executive at Boeing who made 346 people lose their lives has spent a single day in jail.